I arrived in that distant city long after sunset, when the last buses hissed like dying beasts, and the street lamps flickered with a nervous amber pulse. The air carried a sour chill, as if something invisible had exhaled across the entire district. I stepped out of the taxi and found myself staring at the object of my assignment, an abandoned library, once grand, now sagging like a weary titan. Its facade was veiled with ivy that writhed in the wind like searching fingers. Broken windows gaped at me, each one reflecting the faintest tremor of candle-yellow light from somewhere deep inside, though I knew no light should have been there at all. My informant had sworn the building had no power for years, no caretaker, no trespassers brave enough to linger. And yet, there it was, that impossible glow. A cat slinked across the stairs leading to the entrance, fur bristling, its eyes locked on the door behind me rather than the ruin ahead. I felt as though I had stepped between two breaths of some ancient creature, one that had been waiting for me specifically. I tightened my coat, whispered the truth only I could hear. I shouldn't have come alone. Then I pushed the heavy door, and it moaned, a long, slow, grieving sound that echoed into a darkness thick enough to swallow words whole. The library welcomed me. The darkness inside didn't fall. It rose. It swelled from the floorboards like a cold tide, brushing against my ankles as though testing my presence. My flashlight, stubborn and dull, carved only a weak tunnel through the gloom. The beams quivered, not from my hand, but as if the air itself resisted being illuminated. The scent hit me next. Old paper steeped in damp earth, tinged with something metallic, faintly sweet. The smell of memories left too long in the dark. Books lay scattered across the floor in unruly drifts, as though someone had torn through the aisles in a frenzy, or fled. I moved deeper, boots crunching on fragments of glass and dried leaves that had no business being indoors. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, behind me. I froze. The sound stopped too, perfectly matched like a mocking mirror of my own stillness. The library's silence thickened until it pressed against my eardrums. My heartbeat became a drum in a distant hallway. I turned slowly, very slowly. Nothing stood behind me, only the open door I had entered through, now shut tight, though I hadn't heard it close. The footsteps resumed. This time they came from the second floor, above me. And yet the dust on the staircase was untouched. Something unseen was moving, watching, calculating. I swallowed hard and stepped closer to the stairs, each creak under my weight echoing up into the hollow dark above. Whatever waited for me there was no longer trying to hide. The staircase groaned beneath me like an old man reluctant to rise. With each step the air grew colder, as though the upper floor hoarded winter in its rafters. My breath fogged in the thin beam of my flashlight, drifting like pale ghosts slipping from my lungs. At the landing, the darkness felt thicker, denser. It pressed against my coat, brushed the edges of my thoughts. I could almost swear it was listening. Then came the whisper. Not a voice, but the shape of a voice, a thin current of sound that slithered between the bookshelves like a draft with intent. The words were indecipherable, fragmented, carried on the faint flutter of brittle pages shifting without wind. I aimed my light toward the nearest aisle. The shelves stood crooked, sagging under the weight of decades. But something caught my eye. A trail of books leading inward, their covers open, pages curled. Each one displayed a single sentence highlighted by time's yellow stain. Different books, different authors, but the same handwritten line again and again. He's already upstairs. I knelt, tracing the ink with my gloved finger. Fresh, not old like the pages, still tacky. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. A sudden thud echoed farther down the corridor, heavy, jarring, like something large dropping from a great height. I rose, pulse drumming in my throat. Another thud, closer this time. The whispering stopped. Even the dust seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the dark at the end of the aisle, I heard a slow, dragging sound, as though something enormous was shifting its weight and beginning to crawl toward me. The dragging grew louder, wet in its rhythm, as though whatever moved had limbs wrapped in something heavy or broken. My flashlight trembled in my grip, its beam jittering across warped wood and torn bindings. I took one cautious step back. The sound stopped. Silence fell so suddenly it felt like a blow. My pulse thundered in my ears, a frantic warning. I forced my light toward the end of the aisle. At first I saw nothing, just darkness layered upon darkness. Then the beam slid across a patch of floor smeared with something darker than ink. A trail. Thick. Fresh. It gleamed. The stench hit an instant later, iron, rot, and the sour breath of a room sealed too long. I lifted the flashlight higher, its cone widening, and the shelves to my left lurched violently. Something inside them slammed against the wood. Books burst outward, showering the aisle like startled birds. The shelves groaned and buckled as if some huge force strained against them, eager to break free. An inhuman rasp unfurled through the cracks, low, rattling, and furious. I staggered back, heart clawing its way higher in my chest. Another impact, strong enough to make the entire row shudder. Dust rained down in a choking cloud. Whatever hid in there was growing impatient. I turned to run, but the aisle behind me had changed. Books were stacked across the path, forming a jagged barricade that hadn't been there seconds before. Their pages fluttered open on their own, 1,000 little tongues rustling in anticipation. Behind the collapsing shelves, something began to push through. And in that moment, I realized with a cold, sinking certainty, whatever had been already upstairs wasn't human, and it wasn't alone. Instinct surged before thought could catch it. I leapt over the barricade of books, boots skidding across loose pages that curled like wounded creatures. Behind me, the shelves finally gave way with a tortured shriek, followed by the wet slap of something massive hitting the floor. I didn't look back. Not yet. The corridor ahead stretched longer than I remembered, the architecture subtly wrong. Corners sagged at unnatural angles. Shadows pooled where no shadows should have existed at all. My flashlight flickered, protesting the strain of so much darkness pressing against its beam. I forced myself onward. My breath echoed too loudly, as if the library itself amplified it, hungry for sound. The walls seemed closer now, the air thicker, as though the library was slowly inhaling me. Then a new sound emerged. Not dragging, not footsteps. A low, rhythmic clicking, like nails tapping on wood from inside the walls. Left side, right side, both, moving with me. I tried the nearest door, locked. The next, also locked. Each lock clicked softly after I touched it, as though a polite refusal. The clicking inside the walls grew faster. I spun, pointing my flashlight behind me, and the beam caught a shape rounding the far corner. Tall, bent, lurching with an uneven gait, its silhouette quivering as though stitched from smoke. It froze when the light touched it. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then its head, or what passed for one, twisted with a slow, audible crack. A pair of pale glints flared within the darkness of its face, staring directly at me. The clicking in the wall stopped. The creature took one deliberate step toward me, and all the doors lining the corridor unlocked at once, their latches snapping open with a chorus of metallic sighs. An invitation, Or a trap? The thing shuddered and began to rush forward. I grabbed the nearest doorknob and hurled myself into the room, slamming the door just as something heavy crashed against it from the other side. The door shuddered behind me as something struck it again, hard enough to send a fine spray of dust drifting from the frame. I pressed my back to the wood, feeling its violent tremor pulse through my spine. For a moment I wondered if the hinges would hold, or if I would soon be staring into that twisting silhouette again. But the strikes stopped, abruptly, as if the creature had lost interest, or found a different way in. The silence that followed was worse. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, and swept my flashlight through the room. It was small, windowless, and unnaturally still, an airless pocket sealed away from time. Shelves lined the walls, but unlike the chaos of the lower floor, everything here was meticulously arranged. Too neat, too intentional. A single table stood in the center. On it, a book lay open, waiting. My steps sounded muffled, swallowed by something unseen. As I approached the table, a crawling cold ran up my arms, like being studied by something just behind me. The book's pages were blank, every one. I flipped through them faster, blank, 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 until the last page. A single sentence had been written in the same fresh, tacky ink as the warnings downstairs. He should not have chosen this door. My heartbeat faltered. I stepped back from the table, and the door behind me clicked. Not a lock engaging, a lock disengaging. Slowly, softly, like someone easing it open from the other side. I didn't dare turn around, but I heard it, the whisper of wood moving, the faint creak of hinges shifting, and then a voice, low and breathless, slipping through the widening crack. "I can see you now." That voice, dry as parchment, close as a nightmare, glided through the room and settled along my spine like an icy finger. I didn't turn, couldn't. My body had locked itself in place, every instinct screaming that to look would mean losing more than my life. The door eased open another inch, then another. Its shadows stretched across the floor in a long, trembling line that reached toward my boots. I lifted my flashlight. The beam wavered, thinning as it neared the doorway, as if the darkness beyond were drinking it in, swallowing the light before it could reveal the source. The whisper came again, this time almost beside my ear. "You read too far." A surge of cold air brushed against my shoulder, breath unmistakably human, or something imitating humanity far too well. My muscles finally obeyed fear's command. I spun, swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The beam hit the door, but nothing stood there. No figure, no shadow. Just the door, open no wider than a cautious invitation. Yet the breath had been real. I felt it still, clinging to my skin like frost. I took a shaky step forward. The hallway outside looked unchanged, if such a word held meaning here. Empty and long, its dimness pooling like spilled ink. No sign of the creature, no sign of movement. But something had entered the room with me. I could feel it. Behind the table, a soft rustle stirred the stillness. The book, the one with the blank pages, was no longer blank. Lines of ink unfurled across them on their own, writing themselves in frantic looping strokes. The pages flipped violently, as if caught in a storm only the book could feel. And then it stopped. One page remained open. A new sentence glistened, ink still wet. "Don't close the door." I turned just in time to see the door begin to swing shut on its own, slowly, silently, as though something invisible pressed it closed from the hallway.
And for the first time since entering the library, I realized I wasn't trapped in the room. Something else was being trapped with me. The door clicked shut with a soft finality, like a coffin settling into its place. The sound slid into my bones. I took a single step back from it, refusing to look away for fear that something, anything, might materialize between blinks. But the room behind me exhaled. Not metaphorically, not imagination. A real, shuddering breath, low, trembling, and far too close to the floor. My flashlight trembled as I turned it toward the table. The beam hesitated, flickered, then steadied on the space beneath the wooden frame. Something crouched there. A shadow thicker than darkness, hunched and quivering, pressed into the cramped space like a creature that had folded itself into shapes no living thing should manage. Its edges weren't clean. They frayed into the air, wavering like smoke, yet undeniably solid. It shifted. A soft scraping followed, like bone dragging on wood. I took a step back. My foot landed on a loose page of the book, and the paper crunched far too loudly. The creature, if that's what it was, stopped moving. Then slowly, deliberately, its head tilted upward. Two pale ovals shimmered into existence, faint at first, then brightening with a hungry glow. Eyes, if the word applied. They weren't set in a face. They floated in the shadow like twin moons rising from a black sea. The air grew colder, heavier, difficult to swallow. The thing extended a limb, long, jointed incorrectly, bending in two directions at once. Fingers, if they were fingers, unfurled like withered branches reaching for the edge of the table. My flashlight dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, as though the creature were drinking its light the way a starving man inhales air. Another breath escaped it. Closer, closer. My heart hammered so hard I feared the thing could hear it, taste it. Then the creature spoke, not in words. Those it had used before were clear and sharp. This was a sound like pages tearing underwater, a vibration more than a voice, a warning, a promise. I realized then that it wasn't trying to lunge at me. It was waiting, waiting for me to make a choice, waiting for me to come closer. And then, from behind the creature, deeper under the table, another voice whispered, "He found us." That whisper, thin as a cracked reed, didn't come from the creature staring at me. It came from deeper in the dark, behind it, beneath it, another presence. My skin tightened as though every hair tried to retreat back into my body. The living shadow under the table shifted aside, reluctantly, as if making room, or yielding space to something older, something with claim to the room. My flashlight guttered again, dimming to a dying ember, barely enough to reveal movement. A ripple in the darkness, like fabric being pulled away to uncover something hidden. Then I saw it. A hand. Small, human-shaped, but each finger impossibly long, tapering to points so fine they could have cut glass. It rested gently on the wooden floor, pale as candle wax, trembling as though its owner hadn't touched the world in years. The creature in front of it, those floating, moon-pale eyes, lowered its head, almost in submission, and the smaller hand drummed once on the floorboards. A command. The larger creature slithered backward into the darkness, limbs folding with sickening elegance, withdrawing as if ashamed to be seen too clearly. But the smaller one, the owner of that trembling hand, remained. Then it spoke again, clearer this time, childlike yet impossibly heavy with age. "Don't let it touch you." My breath stopped halfway in my throat. "Who?" I whispered before I could stop myself. A pause. A soft scrape as the hand pulled further into the shadows. "The one watching you." I froze. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I turned my head toward the door. The faint crack beneath it had gone dark, completely black, as if something huge stood on the other side, blocking every sliver of hallway light.
Then, a single, deliberate tap against the wood, right beside my ear. Light, polite, certain. Tap. The childlike voice whispered again, shivering with fear. It found a way in, without opening the door. The tap lingered in the air, soft, but heavy with intent. I stared at the door, every instinct insisting that nothing stood there. Nothing could stand there without sound, without breath, without shape. And yet, the crack beneath the door stayed pitch black. Less a line of shadow, more a mouth pressed to the floor. I raised my flashlight. The beam barely pushed an inch into that darkness. It looked like the door led to a void, not a hallway. Behind me, the childlike voice whimpered, a tiny, brittle sound swallowed almost immediately by the room. "Don't look at it. If you look, it comes closer." My pulse stuttered. Too late. I'd already looked. A soft, drawn-out scratch sounded from the other side of the wood. Slow. Measured. Like claws or fingertips tracing the grain. Then the door began to bulge inward. Not push, bulge. As if something pressed its face against the wood, distorting it from the other side. The shape that formed was wrong, far too tall, far too thin. And it rippled, shifting like something pressed against fabric instead of solid oak. A hollow voice seeped through the cracks. "You read my page." The book on the table snapped shut with a violent clap. The air turned colder. The creature beneath the table hissed, low and furious, though it dared not move closer to the door. The childlike voice whimpered, trembling, "It wasn't meant for you." The bulge in the door sharpened, a long indentation dragging downward, as if whatever pressed against it was lowering its head to peer through the keyhole. I took a step back. Another. My flashlight finally died. Silence swallowed the room. Then, in the darkness, came a whisper so close it seemed to bloom inside my skull. "Open it." I clenched my jaw. Why would I do that? I breathed. The answer came from both voices at once. The child beneath the table, and the thing behind the door. Because this room is worse. Their overlapping voices, one trembling, one hollow, struck me like a blow. Worse. Worse than the thing trying to force its way in. I didn't want to believe it. But the air itself had begun to change. A slow pulse throbbed through the floorboards, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Not mine. The walls sighed, expanding and contracting like lungs hidden beneath plaster. The ceiling shifted with a faint groan, as though settling or bending closer. The room was waking up. I stumbled back, one hand brushing against the table. The book, now shut, trembled beneath my fingers. Heat pulsed through its cover, faintly at first, then stronger, like a fever spreading through the wood. A crack, split across the ceiling, thin, hair-like, but unmistakably growing. Darkness seeped through it, not shadow, but liquid blackness thick as oil, dripping with a slow, lazy hunger. The child beneath the table whimpered. "It's opening its eyes." The floor lurched beneath me, not violently, but with intention, like a muscle contracting around prey. I backed toward the door. The bulging shape on the wood had retreated.
The door at my back vibrated once, softly, petulantly, as though the room inside hadn't yet accepted my escape. I pushed away from it. The hallway stretched before me in two directions, both equally still. But the stillness wasn't comforting. It watched me. The air here had an alertness to it, as if every particle hovered in anticipation. The library knew where I was now. My footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing back from the walls a fraction too late, as though something repeated them after me. Slower, heavier. I walked faster. Shelves loomed on either side again, but these were different, metal instead of wood, narrow and tall, their frames skeletal. They held no books, only objects, cracked jars, dusty boxes, a violin case with a single fingernail gouged into its side. None of them looked touched in years. None of them looked safe. Halfway down the corridor, a soft strain of music drifted toward me, a single violin note, high and trembling, coming from somewhere behind the shelves. It lasted only a second, a sigh of sound, but it froze me in place. Then came another sound, a slow inhale, deep, human, right behind me. I spun, no one there, but the air behind me was still warm, as if someone had just been breathing down my neck. My flashlight flickered back to life on its own, humming weakly. The beam swept across the shelves, and every object on them had turned to face me. Jars leaned, boxes angled. The violin case had shifted forward, its latch now opened, as though someone or something had just lifted the lid. I stepped back. A long, thin shadow slid across the floor at the far end of the corridor. Too long to be human, too fluid to be cast by any light I could see. It moved toward me, stretching like a stain. The child's trembling whisper drifted faintly from somewhere behind the shelves. "Don't let it reach your feet." I looked down. The shadow was only a meter away, and it was hungry. I stumbled back, nearly slipping on the dusty tiles as the shadow slithered forward, silent, deliberate, stretching itself with feline patience. It didn't move like darkness shaped by light. It moved with intent, pulling itself toward me as though it had weight, purpose, hunger. The bulbs overhead dimmed the closer it crept, as if the shadow were swallowing their light one filament at a time. I took another step back. The shadow quickened. A thin tendril split from its front, an exploratory limb, long and tapering, reaching across the floor. It brushed the toe of my boot, and an icy numbness stabbed upward through my foot like a jolt of electricity. I jerked away instinctively. Bad choice. The shadow lunged. Its edges tore forward, splitting and reforming into grasping silhouettes, hands, claws, jaws that weren't shaped like anything alive. My body reacted faster than thought. I leapt onto the nearest metal shelf, climbing it like a ladder. The thin frame groaned, the objects rattling violently as it swayed beneath my weight. Below me, the shadow writhed, clawed, reared upward like a tide trying to swallow the moon. And from within it, deep and muffled, I heard voices, many voices, layered, weeping, laughing, calling my name. How did they know my name? The shelf buckled under me. Metal screamed. One more second and it would collapse. Then something small and pale darted across the floor. A hand, not severed, alive, skittering on fingertips like a frantic insect. I recognized it. The child from the room. The hand slapped itself flat in front of the shadow, and the shadow recoiled with a sound like tearing fabric. It shuddered violently, its tendrils snapping back as though burned. A second hand emerged from the darkness behind the shelf, then a face, half-formed, pale and indistinct, like a child carved from fog. It looked up at me with wide, glass-colored eyes. "Jump," it whispered. Its voice was tiny, cracking under strain. "Hurry!" I hesitated for the beat of a heart, and the shadow surged again, rising like a black wave ready to swallow the shelf whole. No more time. I pushed off, leaping into the air, straight toward the reaching hands of the child-shaped thing beneath me. It caught my wrist with surprising strength, and the world twisted, sideways, backwards, inside out. For a breathless second, there was no floor beneath me, no shelves, no shadow, only a blur of motion and a hand cold as moonlit water pulling me through a seam in the air. Then my boots hit solid ground. But not the same ground, not the same corridor. The child-shaped figure, still half-formed, half-shadow, half-light, stumbled backward, its shimmering fingers releasing my wrist. It wavered like smoke trying to remember how to stand. I steadied myself, gasping. The air here was different, thinner, hollow, and the silence, too complete, as if sound itself hid in fear. We weren't on any floor I'd seen. We were in the between. A narrow passage stretched around us, walls warped, ceiling low, a cramped artery running through the library's bones. Bare bulbs hung from wires like dead fruit, dim and soft as dying stars. The walls throbbed with a faint pulse, as though they and this place were alive. The child thing looked up at me. Its eyes flickered, its face wavered between the semblance of a boy and something far older. It shouldn't have come here, but the other side was worse. Behind us, the seam in the wall shivered, then sealed shut with a sound like a breath being held shut. Gone. No hint it ever existed. I swallowed hard. What was that shadow? The child's gaze fell to the twisting floor. It wears everyone it touches. My skin crawled. "And you?" I asked softly. It didn't answer immediately. The lights flickered above us, and with each flicker, its body changed shape. Taller, smaller, blurred, sharpened, as if it couldn't decide what memory to resemble. "I'm what's left," it finally said. "What the library didn't finish." Before I could react, a thunderous shudder rippled through the walls. The bulbs swung wildly, dust cascaded from the ceiling. The pulse in the walls quickened, no longer calm, but alarmed. The child's head snapped toward the left end of the passage, eyes suddenly wide with terror. "It found the seam," it whispered. "It's coming through the walls." A distant scratching began, growing louder, closer, as the something enormous crawled just beneath the surface, searching for us. "What do we do?" I hissed. The child took my hand, its grip cold, trembling. "We run, and we do not look back." We ran. Not fast enough to escape fear, but fast enough to stay ahead of whatever scraped and writhed behind the walls. The passage shuddered around us with every impact, dust raining, bulbs swinging like panicked pendulums. The library was trembling, or waking. The child's cold hand pulled me left, then right, guiding me through the warped artery as though it knew every hidden vein of the place. The walls narrowed, squeezing inward. I felt them brush my shoulders, warm, damp, pulsing like muscle. The scratching behind us grew louder, closer, ragged with hunger. "Faster!" the child gasped, its voice splitting, fracturing into 3 smaller voices before knitting itself back together. "It smells the pages on you." We turned a corner, and the passage opened into a massive vertical shaft, a hollow column of darkness stretching both up and down. A spiral staircase clung to its wall, rusted and trembling. The child tugged me downward. "The heart is below." Heart, a word that should never belong to a building. The stairs groaned under our weight, shedding flakes of rust like dried blood. The deeper we went, the more the air throbbed, slow, rhythmic, heavy, the pulse of something enormous dreaming in the dark. Then the staircase jolted, a violent tremor. Screws tore free. I grabbed the railing as a section of the steps above us tore away, sucked into the wall by invisible force. A wet, greedy sound followed, like the room swallowing a meal. The child cried out and pulled me faster. We reached the bottom just as the last of the staircase vanished into the living stone. Before us opened a cavernous chamber, vast, circular, its walls carved with thousands of shelves. Books filled them, countless books, trembling as if breathing. At the center stood a great pedestal of bone-white stone. On it lay a single book, bound in something that wasn't leather. The child stopped, its form flickering with fear. "This is why it called you." "Called me?" I whispered, breath ragged. It nodded. You're the first to come by choice. My stomach twisted. Why me? Because you listened, the child said softly, and because it needs someone who can walk out with the truth. Behind us, the scratching exploded, something huge bursting into the shaft above, plunging down, howling without breath or throat. The shelves shook violently, books rattled like teeth. No time. I approached the pedestal. The book quivered, then opened itself. Pages fluttered in a frantic storm until one settled, blank, save for a single line written in the same fresh ink I'd seen before. Take me, and the rest will end. The child hissed in terror. Don't! That's what it wants! The chamber roared as the creature crashed closer, its shadow pouring down the walls like spilled ink, its many voices shrieking in a chorus of stolen breath. My hand hovered over the book. Take it and end this night raider? Or obey the child, who wasn't human at all, and flee into a maze that hungered for me? The floor trembled. The shelves groaned. The creature howled. I made my choice. And as my fingers touched the cover, the library itself inhaled. The rest of this tale? That must wait until the final chapter finds you.